both sides on. And now I'm going to get ready to do an alignment. So for that, got these alignment stands from Paco Motorsports. They're like a Miata people, but they make these cool alignment stands. So the idea is you bolt these to your hubs. They have little roller bearings on the bottom. So as you put it on there, they can move for camber and turn it as you know, as the wheels settle. These will move around, so the whole car is kind of floating. And then you tie some cables front to back, and you have these little index gauges that allows you to set tow. And you can also measure. These are slots for tape measures to measure across. So then you can measure tow relative to the two front wheels, and then you can measure it relative to the aft wheels too. So you can make sure everything's centered. Then along with that, I have this handy dandy magnetic camber gauge. Idea here being, mounts to your hub. You can measure positive, negative camber, and it's actually set up to measure caster also. You do that by turning the wheel 20 degrees. Ideally you'd have this with some swivel plates, but you can also do it. These are 20-degree markings here, so you can kind of line those up. And basically for caster, like you would rotate it, use this adjustment to set that to 0, and then when you bring that back, that'll actually tell you the caster. So I will use that all to adjust the alignment, and hopefully that works. I've never done this by myself, so we'll see. But the whole reason I'm doing this is you can see these are my alignment specs that I had previously, and the big issue is my camber here. I do have a caster disagreement between the left and right, that I don't know if the subframe's misaligned or something, so I'm going to troubleshoot some of that. But then my camber also, since it's not adjustable with the stock arms, but with it being lowered, I'm at minus 2.3 and minus 1.9, which is way too much for a street vehicle. So that's the idea of the adjustable upper arms. One also thing to note is the rear camber. So this is actually, you know, within spec. Spec is minus 1.2 or less, and you know, 0.7, 0.8, which according to some other D2 owners, Rich, I'll drop his YouTube channel below. He's got a video that kind of shows how to, if you do have this issue, I don't know if he's lower than mine or something different, but on the rear, if you do need to get more positive camber adjustment out of it, he was at like 1.7 or so, minus 1.7, so out of spec. So he modded this back here. You have this eccentric bolt, probably a little easier to see on that side, and it kind of maxes out, and you can grind away this back part to then bring your knuckle further out pushing the bolt that way to then increase your positive camber. Now, it doesn't have a perfect 50-50 weight ratio, which would then put 1,000 pounds on each stand. So I will be overloading the front stands, doing this at my own risk. These are going to be placed on the ground, not on stands, so I won't be underneath the car adjusting anything, only working through the wheel well. So if something does fail, this will only have a few inches to fall, but do so at your own risk if you want to try this. Well, I've got the camber gauge on the aft side here, and as I showed previously, what was measured when I had an alignment done about a year ago when I had the forward control arms replaced, it was at about 0.7. But if you read here, both sides read about 1.25, which would make a bit more sense compared to what Rich was seeing on his lowered S8. So maybe the camber measurements weren't great from the original alignment. This I probably will, well, I don't think I'm maxed out on the adjustment here, so I might try and adjust that, max it out, see where I get, and if I can't get it, under, close to 1 probably, then I'll do that mod on the rear spindle here. Just so you can visualize a little, so this bolt here, this is an eccentric bolt. Notice how it's not centered in that washer. So that bolt is actually fixed to the washer. So what you want to do to adjust this is to loosen the nut side. Don't loosen this side. Loosen the nut side, because this is the adjustment side. And as you rotate this side, it's going to spin this washer relative to the bolt hole. So as you spin the washer, that is going to move the spindle in and out, changing your camber. Now, so I just adjusted this to the max positive camber. So if we move the bolt to the closest position inward, that's going to move the spindle to the furthest position outward to give us the most positive camber on this adjustment. So now you can see here we've got it just a bit closer to right around 1. So you read this right in the center of the bubble. So it might be just over 1, but the spec according to my previous alignment was 1.2. You could probably pull this in. We could definitely pull this in a little tighter if I ground off that adjustment. But I think I'm going to keep it here because -1's pretty good. So I'm going to go check the other side after I adjust it and see how close I can get that. And if I can get them both to 1, then I'll be happy with that. Over here on the driver's side, not as lucky. So that adjustment is maxed out and sitting probably around 1.25, 1.3. I was able to get the other side just under 1, but this side's a little different, so might have to do that little grinding trick. See if I can get this side under 1. Ground a little off here. Didn't need that much. You don't have to, I guess you could grind off that whole tab, but I didn't because I didn't need it. So just a little bit, and now I've got it pretty much just under 1, just like the other side. Then you'll notice I've got the tape measure set up here to measure the toe on the rear axle, and little diagram. I mean, there's lots of information out there about how to do home alignments. So basically, you're measuring the distance. This is exaggerated because the angle is not that much, but just to show that the aftmost one is going to be larger than the forward one to toe in. That's generally what you want on a car to make it feel stable versus unstable. So you measure the aftmost side, then you measure the forwardmost side. That's your A and B here. And then you measure the distance between here, which some measurements they have you do this with the tire, so that's going to be like your tire width. So you're just doing trigonometry here. So you have A and B, and then I call this X. So that gets you, the four sides of your box. And if we assume that toe is equal, so if we assume that these wheels are centered, which based on my last alignment, the toe was pretty even between the two. So I'm assuming that's even. So then you can calculate your distance, and there's some calculators online that then give you, based on your distances and your so-and-so, your X distance, your tire distance, or your diameter, some of them call it. You can calculate the angle. That's of course the total angle, which here I got 0.28 degrees of total toe, which works out to be 0.14 of toe on each side if we assume that it's even. And that ends up being a little larger than my previous one. I think the previous one ended up being about 0.2 total instead of 0.28, but that's probably just my delta in measuring with these tapes, because I measured 30/2 of an inch there. So that matched close enough that I'm happy with it. And now that I have camber set on both wheels, I am ready to go to the front, which is of course the fun part, because that's the part that I've messed up. It's been a few days, but finally got back around to doing the alignment. One good thing, so these sat over the weekend, so probably almost a week, these hub stands just sitting on it, and they didn't fall apart, so that's good. So it took a while, a couple hours, to get each side lined up and towed. So one of the things is when you're setting this, anytime you adjust one of the upper arms, that kind of screws up your caster reference. So then you have to reset it to 20 degrees, adjust that dial to reset it to 0, turn it back, and then everything, then you can recheck everything, see where your camber sits, see where your caster sits. I don't think this is an actual necessarily good reference for caster. So it's saying I've got it set up for about 2 degrees of positive caster, which is less than the factory. Factory should be like 3.5, but I'm not sure with the multi-link and how all that works. And then I've got camber set at -1. So, but regardless of what caster is, because it didn't quite match my factory alignment previous settings, so regardless what it is, I've got it set to the same on both sides. So that's really all that matters. So -1 degree camber, 2 degrees positive caster on this side. Bring it over here. Level it. -1 +2. So that is all good. And what I'm going to do now is, comes with these cables and springs. hook the cable up here, and then you'll use these graduated scales. You'll run the cable from the front to the back hub stand. You'll use those scales to measure thrust angle, and you want that 0 between front and back. Just saying that the wheels are aligned and they're towed relative to each other, so you're not crabbing. We're not doing circle track racing, so you want that 0. So I'm going to do that, and that'll finish up the alignment. But I'll have to tighten everything else, all the adjustment nuts up, and after I lift the car back up, just take off the hub stands, I'm going to do a brake job. So I've these pads, EBC yellows, which I've been really happy with them from a performance standpoint. They dust like hell, but they have really good initial bite. So they're a really good street pad minus the dust. But since these are pretty well worn, they've got, I don't know, maybe an 1/8 inch, 3/16 left. I'm going to swap these out. I've got some Hawk, I forget which model, but not HP Plus, I think. I don't know. I'll let you know when I get to that. Cable, tensioned. Now these things are meant for Miatas, so a bit shorter wheelbase. So they say only to tension the cable just enough to keep it from flopping around. It's got these different ferrules along here for different tensions. They slide in there, and I had to stretch the string quite a bit, even with just on the very longest tension setting there. So not meant for this long of a wheelbase. But so what you want to check is in the rear. You want to use this graduated scale to check, and then you want to, so I don't know if you can see, spine's lined up right there in the center, and then you check that on both sides, and mine happens to be the exact same on both sides, which is what you want. You want that thrust angle to be 0 for a street car, and if that were wrong, you adjust it with the rear toe. So you adjust each side till it gets there, and then you have to double check your total rear toe on the rear too after you mess with that. So that's the alignment. Now let's do brakes. One last shot at the control arms here before everything gets back on. So brakes here. So Hawk HPS 5.0. That's what I was trying to remember. So HPS 5.0 are supposed to be a mix of the previous HPS and HP Plus. So I've got HP Plus on the UrQuattro, and they're dusty as hell, just like the EBC yellows. So these are supposed to be kind of a compromise between HPS and HP Plus. So hoping these still have pretty good bite, but less dust. I've had HPS on previous cars, and they're like better than stock pad, but not nearly as aggressive as the yellows or HP Plus. So we'll see if these are a good compromise. Now, one thing between the HPS 5.0 and the EBC yellows are these don't have brake pad sensors. Yellows do, which, I don't know, you know when the pad's low, but you also have the chance of it yelling at you when it's not due to wiring issues or pad issues. So, not a big deal to not have them. I look at my pads close enough to notice if they're getting low. So probably what I'll do is on the yellows, so if you put these in, you're going to get the light. You're going to get the warning. So I think what I'll do is when I take these yellows out, since they're shot, I'll take this jumper and I think you just splice the two wires together so you can make yourself a little shorting pigtail. Now the stock pads will have this too, so if you're doing a brake job on these and you're putting in pads that don't have sensors, or you just don't want to deal with those sensors anymore, make sure to keep this connector off of your old pads and use it to make a jumper. So these pads actually still have a decent amount of life left, a little more than I thought they might, but oh well. I got the car apart, so I might as well change them. So here's the little sensor, there's the two wires. So you just need to snip this here, or you can actually kind of snip it further up, just because the shorter wire will kind of be out of the way. And you just want to cut the wires, strip the insulation, and then twist the two together and solder them or crimp them. Basically, you just want the two wires connecting, and that's going to tell the car that you have a good brake pad. One thing, when you're looking at these connectors, check for corrosion on the body side, especially if somebody ran pads without these and didn't have a connector in there. The chassis side can get really nasty and corroded. Here's a tool we're going to use for compressing the pistons in the front rotor. So I will drop a link for this down below. Bought it on Amazon. So this is made for, this works for single piston or two piston or four piston calipers. There's actually interchangeable plates. There's some bigger plates if you have like a 6 or an 8 piston. This will probably connect it or cover, have big enough plates to cover all the pistons. And the idea here is it's got a ratchet. So you put this in between the four pistons, twist it. As it ratchets, it takes these two metal pads and it expands them outwards to push in the calipers all evenly. So this is way easier than trying to use a block of wood and push in two pistons at a time, then have the other pistons pop out. This makes it super quick. They sell a couple different styles. They sell some that are kind of on pliers that you kind of squeeze to push out, but I like this style a little better. I feel like this applies a little more torque, and it's just a little easier to get into smaller places with. So we'll use that on the front, and there's a tool for the rear, which I'll show you. So pretty much most modern cars, or I don't know, since the 70s, 80s on at least import cars, a lot of times the parking brake is built into the rear caliper, and it's self-adjusting with a disc brake caliper. So as the pads wear, and as you actuate the brakes, you want that piston to account for that pad wear. So the piston's kind of on a thread. So as you use the brakes, the piston slowly twists out, which makes up for the pad wear. So then when you go to use your parking brake, you have consistent feel every time. It's always going to tighten up. Otherwise, if your pads didn't self-adjust as the pads would wear, you'd have to pull harder and harder. So the issue with that on the rear calipers is you can't just, like you do on the front, you can't just take a clamp and push the pistons back in because there's that thread. So what you have to do is you have to slowly twist that piston as you compress it. So that's what this tool's for. I bought this one at Harbor Freight. You can buy them Amazon, or you can rent them from your local auto parts store. So usually in the piston there's some kind of indent. On the Audis, usually a slot or a cross, and you find the size stud here that fits in there, and then these threaded portions, you assemble it with a backer plate, and this will allow you to slowly compress that piston while twisting it at the same time. And there's a couple different size backer plates, so I won't show you this in motion. There's lots of different videos that talk about this style thing, but just wanted to show you the different tools that you'll need to do this job. Another thing to note, so these are this is part number for the pads I ordered. I think these cross-reference to the S8, but one thing to note are the D2 S8 calipers are essentially Porsche 993 twin turbo. We call them big reds, except with a slightly larger mounting pad, since the D2 uses a 345 millimeter rotor, and I think the 993 twin turbo uses a 330 or 323. So there's a couple, I don't know, 10, 12 millimeter increase in the pad height. And the pistons are slightly different, but otherwise it's essentially the same, and it takes the same pads. So if you don't like what you find with D2 S8 pads, order 993 twin turbo pads, and they'll work perfectly. Back on all fours. So in the front, now that I'm at -1 instead of 2.5 degrees, -2.5 of camber, the fitment's actually a bit more aggressive. So we'll see if that rubs. Hopefully not, because it should add some camber under compression. But lots of clearance in the back. Probably actually put a spacer in the back. But now to go find out how she drives. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. So one note on the adjustable upper control arms. So I've been driving on these for a little bit. One of the things I didn't pay attention to during the alignment was I wanted to make this forward arm nice and long to kind of give myself some more caster. But what I didn't pay attention to, and when I originally kind of put them up and down, I didn't pay attention to how close it got to here. And when you're dead on, it's fine. But when you're making a turn, you know, as this thing slightly pivots, this impacts, as you can see, rubs here and slight hit there. So, you know, the best thing to do would be to shorten this arm and then realign it. You know, so this, I'm pretty sure this was already somewhat bent from the factory just to clear the stock arm. So, I'm wondering if I can just kind of hammer that out, force it a little bit. But I mean, this is visible. The upper side is visible from the engine bay. So, like, hey, it's aluminum, so you got to be careful about that. You don't want it to fatigue and crack. So, we'll see what it looks like, and you know, it might come down to having to do that, shorten that arm anyways. It's the same story on the other side, maybe a little less. Let me grab the light again. So, same story, a little bit less there, but still just some slight amount up there. But other than that, those are working pretty well.